So today we're going to be talking about the split between the Sacae and the Ilia route, which one is a better route, because that's obviously it's Ilia, but basically what do we feel the different impacts of them are, and how do you felt about that whole arc of these Liberators that come in and they're not welcome at all?
Ilia is scarier, especially chapter 20, where there's just like staffs up the wazoo and you're kind of crammed in there. I prefer chapter 20 Sacae, even though you're kind of more crammed. It doesn't have those reinforcements coming from the north, which is usually what does me in. I don't know, I just kind of feel more grouped up together, whereas Ilia, if I remember right, it separates your units like in half.
Yeah, the Ilia chapter you're talking about is the liberation of Ilia, that there's like 2 entry points and you have Juno and all that. So like one of those points there is that I almost never separate my army there. I just go everybody into the left thing, capture Juno. That makes sure that all the staves are together and safe in one spot, And then like if the reinforcements try to come in, they come into the north and they get choked. Like there's no dealing with them.
Well, sounds like I got a new strategy.
Because you can also use Eclipse on the door there, like not the door, the wall, and it'll just bring the wall down to 1 HP, and then you're good to go.
Wait, you can use Eclipse on walls?
Yes. So this is something I learned, is that you know how the walls have 100 HP? If you use Eclipse on a wall, it goes to 1 HP.
And it does auto hit, right?
It automatically hits, yes.
Oh man, I gotta try that.
You get access to some pretty cool units on these routes, like you get Nimi,
Juno on chapter 20 Ilia, and Dayan in chapter 20B. And I don't want to steal your thunder too much, but he is much better than Juno because he's an archer, and the very next chapter after the Gaiden is lots of wyverns that have a lot of HP that Dayan can shoot down.
Wait, you mean to tell me you don't use triangle attack?
Well...
No, I'm kidding, man. I'm kidding. Triangle attack is horrible. I will agree with you 100%. Dayan is the superior unit out of the two of them. He is just way, way better. There's no argument. I saw it in my Iron Man run. You saw it in my Iron Man. I think everybody saw it in the Iron Man run. Like, he is he can one round the Wyvern Lords that have 1 billion HP at the end. He's just so much more powerful than Juno ever will be. Her low stats, so incomparable. Dayan is really strong right from the get-go. Can substitute if you lost Shin or Sue.
Have you ever seen The Shawshank Redemption? Juno's power kind of reminds me of Andy Dufresne chipping away at the wall for many years, but she doesn't actually get anywhere.
Thea is the best of the 3 because she has hard mode bonuses, and why would we even use Juno for that logic? The fact that you have to kind of use Zealot to get here to this, no, you don't have to. Zealot's actually not bad.
Zealot's busted. The way the Binding Blade pre-promotes work, at least with the Paladins, they give you the right stats for whichever part of the game you're in. Like Marcus is perfect for weakening dudes, for the weaker units at the beginning. Zealot just has solid stats all around, and honestly, I've gotten a lot of use out of him until like the mid-late game. And then obviously there's Percival, who we all know about that.
I'm still very against the Sacae route because of one thing, or actually one thing that happens a lot, which is Fog of War maps. During the Ilia route, you only have one Fog of War map, right? Which is the Bitter Cold map that you have to fight that woman that's like sitting all the way back there. There are some Ballistay, some Berserk staffs, whatever. It's annoying, but it's not nearly as bad as Chapter 20, the Silver Wolf, and Chapter 18, which is the one with the endless reinforcements and the Dragon Lords flying at you at super speed, and you have to kind of control the high ground where there's a mix of magic damage, and the bottom where there's a mix of physical damage. It just feels like there's so much going on there, and in the Ilia map, it just really feels dangerous if like you're using flyers, because the flyers can get tapped by the Ballistay since you don't know their range.
Yeah, that's true. Although Chapter 20 Sacae, the East route has a bunch of locked doors, so you can kind of prepare for that because there aren't that many units coming that way. And I guess you can put like a really strong unit like Rutger or Fear on the left side to take out the units coming from the west. And yeah, you do have to be careful about those ballistas. I usually just rescue the weaker units and let the big units take them.
You're right. That's one way to deal with it. I feel like the time constraint though, and the fact that we have to, like, you absolutely have to deal with those bolting mages, because they will easily one-tap a weak unit. Like, and there's 2 of them. But that's where I lost Deke, right? Because I warped Deke in, and I honestly don't regret sacrificing Deke there, because I felt like if I hadn't done that, it would have been a way bigger problem.
Since you have 25 turns, I just waste 5 turns letting those bolting mages run out of ammo and just rescue the people who can't take it.
That's pretty good. You know, I never thought about that perspective, like, just be patient. Ilia Chapter 20 is not nearly as hard, given, like, the tools you have at that time. The restore staves never really ran out. Like, you know how we usually say, like, oh, you gotta stock up on staves, you gotta make sure you stock up on staves. I bought like 4 and I was good.
I'm actually pretty paranoid and I do more than 4, but, well, from your Iron Man, it showed that you really don't need a ton of them. I just am really, really cautious and have like 10. That's why it's so important to have at least 2 healers that can use the restore staff, because if one of them gets berserked, hopefully you're not screwed. Let's just put it that way.
From a story perspective, I've always had this discussion. I feel like this is a very interesting discussion to have. Do you feel that it would be more canon to have Ilia or Sacae? Geographically, it makes more sense to launch your invasion from Sacae, because you're right next to Bern. But
you mean both at the same time?
No, you would do one and then the other. Like, I think he would go first to Ilia, clear it out, and then go to Sacae.
Fair enough. If I had to pick one, especially with FE7 being a thing now, I would guess Roy would go Sacae, and then if it was made after FE7, then Lyn would probably join him.
That would be pretty cool. I think a remake of FE6 would be nice to have an addition of Lyn, or even an acknowledgement of Lyn. You know, I think those things would be very, very interesting to have. If we look at, like, the chapters side by side, I gotta say, like, the Bishop's Teaching versus the Path Through the Ocean, which are basically, like, the 2 first ones. And you gotta admit that the Path Through the Ocean is a lot easier. The one that opens like a path in the middle, you just go over there, you seize the forts, reinforcements stop, and you just kill Arcada and like problem is solved. Whereas like the Bishop Teaching has Fog of War, a Ballistade, the whole magical units up on top. The Laws of Sacae has the ambush spawns from the center, if you don't know about that. You know how I just kind of warp skipped it, like I killed the boss, then I warped Roy in so that we didn't have to deal with it. And the Frozen River, which is the other map, is like way easier. I just feel like Sacae is so much more difficult. There is so many more chances for one of those horse dudes to just walk up and body someone super, super easily in one round of combat, especially your squishies in the background. I guess my beef is that there's so much range with the Sacae route. Like, everybody there has so much range, and the reinforcements are super scary, and they have crit chances and all this. And the Ilia route is more like, alright, I know where they're coming from, I know how they're going to get there, and I can preemptively tackle that. Like, the only chapter I'll give to you that maybe it's harder on the Ilia route is the Bitter Cold, which is the Fog of War one. Because that one is, like, you have to go through this mountainous region, like, it gets really choppy, there's, like, Pegasus Knights that come from the darkness up on top, and they just mess you up. And that chapter, I could definitely see, like, people being like, alright, this chapter is harder than one of the other ones there. But nothing is as hard as like the Silver Wolf and Kel, man. Kel is busted.
Honestly, everyone else is gonna agree with you on that probably, that Ilia's the easier route, but I still can't. Part of it is I think I know where most of the reinforcements come from on Sacae. Rutger is the solution to Kel.
Sacae versus Ilia, the side chapters are pretty weird. The Sacae one spans, oh surprise, a ton of horses on bows. And the Ilia one is actually just a bunch of walls with overlapping ranges for Berserk, in which you have to make sure that at least each group has one person that can cleanse, or one group has 2, which is also very annoying.
Yeah, I prefer the Sacae one because it's easier to reunite the group because of the walls on the Ilia one, because of how crazy those chapters are. I don't deploy max units. I only like to deploy the units at the northwest and the northeast, and then I have them reunite as soon as possible so that we got all our bases covered.
But I agree with you. I think that maybe limiting the deployment was actually the better option. Didn't even think about that. You see, doing less sometimes is more. The next chapter is finally the Binding Blade, in which at the end, if you do not reach chapter 21X, you will have Roy promote. And I think this is arguably considered the most difficult chapter of the game.
Yeah, but you got 30 turns. You're fine.
That's true. You also have a timer on the most difficult chapter in the game. The reinforcement spawn is out of control, like absolutely insane. Thousands upon thousands. Okay, maybe not that much, but like a lot of units. Apparently, what I didn't realize was that if it spawns no reinforcement, it doesn't count it as spawning that turn. So I should have theoretically killed at least one unit on enemy phase each turn to ensure that it spawned one more, but then it would trigger the whole spawn, and it would stop spawning the rest of them.
Yeah, well, you live and learn.
Those dragons with a billion HP, they're terrifying. They come out of the darkness and just one-shot your squishies. Even the strong units really have difficulty keeping up with them. And a lot of what I did was just abuse high avoid tiles, really. And I think you saw it with Garrett and with Gonzalez, and with the trio Percival, Milady, and Rucker on those little forest tiles on the bottom, in which they could just survive and reduce the enemy density.
Terrain is a pretty big deal in Binding Blade, especially with the high enemy stats. That map, though, it straight up spawns reinforcements. It doesn't show you all the units that are going to be on the map, because when you start it, Paladins spawn towards the southwest part of it.
Yeah, it's kind of a little misleading, right? As soon as you start, it's like, oh, here's a billion more units than what you were dealing with.
Yep, it's extremely misleading, but I think that's the point.
It does feel, however, that you're fighting the literal army of Bern. The strongest I've ever seen.
Air caliber and bows.
If there's one thing that doing Ironmans and playing more of these Fire Emblems has taught me, is that you really cannot underestimate the validity of effective weapons.
Effective weapons are a godsend, and the Horseslayer is oddly accurate for whatever reason. I'm not complaining, but it is. The shop just sells a bunch of effective weapons. After Binding Blade, I think they kind of realized that a lot of the weapons you have easy access to, like Killing Edges and Physics Staffs, since you can buy them in the regular shops, I think they later on realized that they should be secret shop only, because being able to buy them in regular shops is insane. 21 Gaiden. When I unwrap my chest for Christmas, I like to get dragons.
That is pretty much the statement, isn't it? You're just oh, I can open... Also, can we just point out the trade-off here? It's either you waste a weapon to kill dragons, or you get an elixir. Really? Is it even worth it opening those chests? I did, because I knew I could handle them effectively, but if you don't have the right things to deal with them, it's not actually worth it to open the chest.
Yeah, I got taken by surprise a lot of the time.
I think they're really risky. I don't like that the chapter has Fog of War, but really it only just bothers. It's linear, so I'm not expecting to get bodied by some dragon flying out of nowhere. It's just, there's a hallway and that's it. No surprises here, so darkness of the chapter really is only story thematic, not game related.
Yeah, honestly, that chapter is go up and down, up and down. There are just these corridors that are very, very long, and you slowly work your way through them, because not everyone's a horse unit.
Then we have the Never-Ending Dream, which is chapter 22, the final chapter of the Binding Blade, if you do not have all the legendary weapons. When you finally fight Zephiel, and Zephiel is pretty scary. Zephiel has pretty busted stats, pretty strong, but at this point you get Roy promoted, so it's also one of those chapters that I just abused Roy and try to get as much experience as possible, because it does help to have a promoted Roy at the end of the game. Once he gets the Binding Blade, his combat utility actually goes up leagues. He goes from being the worst lord to being a little bit better than the worst lord, which is just him, but now with 2 rank.
It's going from 5.5 to 5.5.2.
It's one of those things, you don't expect him to do that, but then he does, and it's actually pretty cool that he does. An actual way of dealing with enemies now. We don't have to make him run away all the time. We can actually challenge enemies now, and a lot of the times we don't have to be afraid.
Yeah, it takes a little bit for his stats to get going, but once they do, and you do want to get them going, because getting the final hit on the final boss results in the best ending for Binding Blade.
The chapter itself, I felt, is it's not as difficult, right? If you know how to deal with certain things, for example, one of the strategies that I did was just berserking that crit dude, and that guy went absolutely nuts. He just killed absolutely everyone in the backline.
Including Zephiel?
Well, the Zephiel part, that part I will say is scary. I think that's the most dangerous part of the chapter, is opening the gate and just having to deal with those really scary silver weapons and all this, and there's dragons that are really strong. Controlling those stairs are really important, because you stop the rest of those strong enemies from coming through.
Never-Ending Dream is a good title for the chapter, because never-ending reinforcements, that's basically the plot of the chapter. Even though it's technically not, it kind of is.
And like Zephiel is scary, but did you really feel like he was that dangerous to deal with?
No.
Actually, none of the bosses in the game are really scary besides Gel. Gel is dangerous.
Yeah, but honestly, if you have a good rucker, you can take out him as well.
Tell me how you feel about the Ghost of
Bern. Take it relatively slowly. As far as I know, there's no reinforcements. You get Carol, who has pretty solid base stats. He has over 100% in a lot of his growth rates. Got to be careful of the status stabs. And Brunnya has 20 defense. She's got like nearly capped stats for a stage, which I would love to have on a unit.
Didn't she tank like one of my sword masters? And I was like, this is not how I expected this to go at all. But I also have done it before in which I just warped someone in, killed Brunnya, and then because once she equips the heavier tome, she gets doubled by everybody. And then you just go in and kill her really fast and just clear it. And that solves a lot of the issues. But the staves, I don't know. I feel like the staves are just there to waste your time, right? They're just there to like really wreck your time.
I usually just wait until she gets her boltings out of her system. But you're right in that when she equips that, she's weighed down a ton. And you can just double out of her.
Yeah.
So that's another really good strategy. I like that you and I think different.
The truth of a legend, in which you basically just walk around these thrones. You have these really slow Manicheets chasing you down. And you have these really strong Manicheets in thrones, but that you can easily like bait out or take at your own time. And there's just so much talking in that chapter. It's kind of obnoxious.
Let me tell you a story about dragons.
Also, how many times did they say the word dragons in that chapter?
Yeah, since I don't use my legendary weapons until then, I just go ham.
And at that point, you should just be spamming them anyway, except for the Binding Blade. And even then, if you have a Hermern staff left, you just Hermern the Binding Blade back up, which is what I did, and just got Roy a bunch of levels there too.
Yeah, I think you and I both used like almost all, if not almost all, our Hammerins on the Binding Blade. I kind of feel like Jan should have had his own special class, since aside from Idunno, who's very warped, he's the only original dragon you fight in the game. And it's kind of weird that he has like the same Manicheet class and looks the same as everyone else in battle.
I don't feel like he was nearly as challenging as he could have been. Honestly, you want to make that chapter difficult? Give everybody 1-2 range. Now cooking with gas. You know what I mean? Now you got to actually think twice about engaging those overlapping ranges. Like, you got to actually be like, oh, this is a little scary.
I still feel like it wouldn't be too bad because you still have the legendary weapons.
But it would just make it a little more, it wouldn't be a snooze fest like how it is. The final chapter of the game is a cakewalk, right? It's literally walk up and bonk Idunno in the face.
It's often regarded as the easiest final chapter in all of Fire Emblem.
Roy can easily one round Idunno. Faye can one round Idunno. Anybody that has a legendary weapon can one round Idunno for the most part.
Yeah, you can finish that chapter in one turn with like warp and stuff. Honestly, that's like really just a plot chapter, and it serves its purpose.
It is satisfactory though. Also, another thing people don't notice is that, you know, at the end when Shaman of the Dark plays, if you get the good ending and when Idunno is with Faye, it's actually Shaman of the Dark, but it's just a couple of octaves like higher.
Yeah, the happy version of it.
It's the happy version of Shaman in the Dark, but it's exactly the same, like no progression, which is, I thought is so cool. I every time I listen to that, I'm like, oh my god, that is so smart. It's the same song because it's the same person. If anything, I will say that the ending of the Binding Blade is finally the moment where Roy actually gets some agency and does make decisions that matter. That is the only redeeming quality of the end game and of Roy's character is during that final couple of chapters for Binding Blade.
Creates consistency with the soundtrack and the overall feel of the game because music tends to invoke a lot of emotion. From the dark version where you're feeling kind of like dread for taking Idunno down to, yay, she's alive and coming to, and now I'm happy. This is a message for Lord Nurgle. There's a sequel. Thank you guys so much for watching. It has truly been a lot of fun to create and put this content out for you all. Send feedback. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to collaborate or join a session, please reach out.
Do so in the comments or by contacting us. We can be reached at fireembros@gmail.com or on our respective Twitches in the banner link or down below. Also, just so you know, the like subscribe button is an armored unit, so go ham and hammer it. This concludes our review of Fire Emblem The Binding Blade. Thank you guys so much for coming with us along on this adventure, and we hope to see you next time when we review one of the other mainline series games from Fire Emblem.